Hey, Anvil here, and welcome to AnvilCast Episode 3. Thanks for joining me, and today I want to talk about the recent beta for Nioh, an upcoming action RPG game for the PS4. If you want to check it out, make sure you grab it before the 6th, because I believe that is when the beta ends. But yeah, I wanted to discuss kind of my thoughts on the game so far, and also how Nioh fits into an emergent genre which people have been calling Soulslike. In a similar way that roguelike refers to the original Rogue game, in that they share a random element, Soulslikes refer to games that share a certain design philosophy with From Software's Souls series, Demon Souls and Dark Souls, basically. But let's jump in, first of all, with some initial impressions of Nioh, the new action RPG Soulslike from Koei Tecmo and Team Ninja, the developers behind Ninja Gaiden. And although I haven't played the classic NES-era Ninja Gaiden games, I did play the Xbox reboot back in 2004. A ridiculously hard, but highly enjoyable action game. Very, very fast-paced, in a similar way that some of Hideki Kamiya's Platinum Games stuff is, really fast. This game was kind of like that, but really hard as well. Even the game's base difficulty was very, very challenging. So I can definitely see some similarities between Ninja Gaiden 2004 and Nioh. Although I'd say that Nioh has even more in common with the Souls series. Now, up until playing the beta, I really wasn't following the development of Nioh at all. I think I read a couple of articles on it, and I was aware that it had some kind of fantasy feudal Japan setting, and that it was influenced by Dark Souls. So that sounded like a cool combination, and is Nioh a Souls-like? I'd say, yeah. I mean, the setting's very different, and from what I can tell, it does do a lot of its own thing. It has a very interesting loot system, but a lot of its core mechanics are clearly influenced by Dark Souls and Demon Souls, and if you enjoy the Souls series, I think you're going to have an easier time getting into Nioh. Take the stamina bar, for instance. In Dark Souls, every important action that you can perform is tied to your stamina bar. So if you were attacking or running, if you're sprinting, if you're button mashing, your stamina bar is going to drain pretty quickly, and eventually, you're going to be unable to act. And in these games, if you get stunned, you usually die. I mean, they're known for their difficulty. And Nioh has a very similar mechanic in place with the key system. You have a bar under your health, which is an energy pool that drains depending on your actions. So again, we're using a very similar mechanic. And Nioh even takes it one step further. If you're button mashing in Nioh and you run out of ki, you're rendered immobile for a number of seconds, and that usually means death. It only takes a couple of shots for an enemy to completely kill you. So running out of ki and being completely immobilized is pretty difficult to recover from. And this makes the initial learning curve in the Nioh beta quite steep, because as an experienced Souls player, I've played every Souls game, there are certain habits, there's certain muscle memory I've become accustomed to, which didn't work really that well in Nioh. One thing being that I sometimes like to queue up my next attack when I'm playing a Dark Souls game. Say if I want to dodge and I know I want to dodge, I will button mash the dodge button intentionally, because I really want the game to know that I want to dodge, and sometimes that ends up getting me killed. Maybe it's a bad habit, but Nioh pretty much forced me to change the way I was playing, just because it does not tolerate button mashing in the slightest, thanks to the punishing key system. However, in Nioh, you can perform something that's called a ki pulse, which basically allows you to regenerate some of your spent stamina. And it's all about timed button presses. You need to press R1 at the exact right time when you see these blue lights flashing around you, and then you're rewarded. So it adds a little extra layer of stamina management, which is interesting and really changes the flow of combat. You can also see your enemy's ki bar, so you're aware of how much stamina they have, really. So, you can use this to your advantage, and it also adds another strategic layer. So it took me a while to get used to, but it actually does have quite a distinctive feel, and definitely doesn't feel exactly like a Souls game. It does have a combat system based around 2 buttons, light and heavy, and similarly to Dark Souls, you can alternate the moves based on your stance. The difference being in Nioh, there are 4 stances instead of just 2, or in the case of Dark Souls 3, they had 3. But in Dark Souls, the idea of two-handing your weapon basically gives you access to a new set of moves. So Nioh really has upped the ante in this regard as well. You can hold R1, and then depending on which of the face buttons you press, that gives you access to a completely new stance. And each stance is staggered based on speed and power. So again, this ties into the ki system, the stamina system. The heavier the attack, the more ki consumed. R1 and triangle gives you access to a high stance, and this allows you to perform a lot of slow but powerful attacks. Whereas R1 and square, that's your mid stance, and basically that gives you access to a more effective block. And your attacks are going to be faster, but less powerful. Now the low stance is where Nioh starts to switch things up a little bit from a typical Souls-like, because it allows you to attack very, very quickly. So when you're playing with a weapon class like the dual katanas, which already attack very, very swiftly anyway, there's a lot of potential there for DPS builds and players that want to focus on agility and speed and maneuverability. You can also sheath your weapon intentionally and then unleash special attacks that are only available in the sheathed stance, which is really cool. And this gets even more complicated when you tie in the actual progression point system. You can spend ability points learning new moves, and you can start customizing your playstyle even further. Now, because I was playing the beta, I'm not sure if maybe some of the online aspects of the game were still not quite ready yet, because the game does include a co-op system, at least the beta does, but any kind of invasions similar to Souls, or like a PvP asymmetrical multiplayer type thing, that remains to be seen. Although you can fight AI-controlled revenants, which are basically just demon samurai that spawn if you touch the bloodstain of another player. But the fact that you can do online co-op is really cool, and it was actually essential. Some of the areas in the beta were ridiculously difficult, and I'm not sure if the difficulty was scaled up, or if the full game is really going to be Ninja Gaiden hard. And I think that this could be a Team Ninja thing, and you know what? That's cool with me. I mean, I like hard games. And I gotta say, the Nioh beta got very, very difficult towards the end, especially some of these Twilight missions, which take previous missions that you've already completed and add new weapons, new items, and significantly increased difficulty. This adds a level of replayability, which is nice to see. I also really like the loot system that Nioh goes for. In a completely unprecedented move, Nioh takes a huge influence from Diablo with its loot system. It hits you with loot constantly. I mean, even in the beta, I guess they were adding a lot of high-level loot in a condensed time period, but it just gave me that same addictive feeling that Diablo, gives me. That is definitely not a bad thing, and I've been waiting for a game to incorporate that Diablo loot system in a way that I can really get into. I couldn't get into Borderlands because I guess I'm not a first-person shooter guy. So what Nioh's doing is really, really cool. I mean, I'm really excited to play the full game too, because, we got the different colors and the scaled rarity of item drops. And enemies are constantly dropping loot, and it just spills from them. Bosses just explode, in a flurry of loot. It is very, very satisfying. And this is one of the cool ways that Nioh sets itself apart from the Souls series. In terms of a loot system, Dark Souls likes to dole out very interesting relics, but each one of them is very, very awesome and individual. It's not quite the loot fest that makes games like Diablo so addictive. And that's fine, that's just Souls, and that's why I love it. But Nioh seems to be taking the best of both worlds, and it has a lot of really cool armor sets, but sometimes they come with different benefits, the rarities change. And when you couple this with the 4 stance system, you got a lot of variety. So combine this with a kind of RNG element to the passive buffs that you can have on certain weapons or pieces of armor. And that's when we're getting into Diablo territory. So it is another interesting mashup, which is, in my opinion, pretty damn cool. Now, the beta used a mission-based structure where you just pick the missions from a kind of a map. And I'm wondering if the full game is going to go for a similar menu system. Obviously Dark Souls is kind of legendary at this point for having a very Metroidvania open world, and judging from the beta, it looks like Nioh is going to go for something closer to the 2004 Ninja Gaiden, a mission-based structure. Whether or not this will include some kind of hub world like Demon Souls, or if they're going to go for more of a chapter-based progression like, something like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta, I mean, this is something that I'm really curious about, so. But I think one of Nioh's biggest strengths right now is definitely its setting. And I didn't realize how much I wanted a fantasy feudal Japan Souls-like until now. But I gotta tell you, it's a good fit, and especially just from an atmosphere point of view, Nioh also draws a lot of inspiration from Souls. There's no music for most of the actual gameplay, just kind of ambience, and I really like that aspect of Souls, so I'm glad that they've kind of aped that. And then when you fight a boss, then you get the fully orchestrated, blood-pumping soundtrack. And I gotta say, the beta had some pretty cool music. The loading screen after you die, man, that's some good music, and I love good menu music. The main character's also pretty interesting. At first, I was like, are you serious? We got a white Caucasian samurai here? Like, is that Geralt of Rivia? I mean, But regardless of what you think of his actual design, the main character, William, as he's known, is based on a real Western samurai, one of the few Western samurai, William Adams, an Englishman, an English mariner who ended up stranded in Japan and ingratiated himself into Japanese society and eventually trained as a samurai. So there is some kind of historical basis in William's character design. But most of the dialogue in the beta was Japanese with English subtitles. And that really works for a game like this, in the same way that when From Software make a Dark Souls game, they just record the English dialogue and they just leave that for every version of the game. I'm really hoping that Nioh will stick with the Japanese dialogue track, because I feel like any kind of dubbing would really break some of the immersion going on in there, because this game really has such a distinctive Japanese flavor. At least, give me the option. And speaking of options, one feature of the Nioh beta, which I really hope is in the final game, is the ability to actually change whether or not you want a higher resolution or a higher frame rate. I've never seen this in a console game before, and I'm really, really, really impressed. Given the choice, I personally will always choose frame rate above resolution. I mean, the difference between 720 and 1080p, for me, is a sacrifice that's completely fine if I can have a silky smooth 60 frames per second. I mean, that's an easy deal for me to make. Although I do, I appreciate a 1080p resolution when we can get it on console. I don't mind sacrificing a little bit of that if I can have 60 frames. Please, sir, can I have some more 60 frames? But yeah, Nioh's got the right idea. Choice is good. And I'd say that just from playing the beta, I'm probably willing to buy this game day one. I think a lot of reviews might say that it's too hard. If it does continue to push the difficulty into the final version of the game, it could be alienating in terms of how hard it is, but I think it has an audience for sure. If you like Ninja Gaiden, you're going to like this, maybe. If you like Dark Souls, there's a high chance that you're going to like this. And, if you like Onimusha, then the setting, you got the Oni, you got demons, ninjas, kind of like Ninja Scroll, almost, the anime. You might be into this too. I mean, it's definitely a game for me. That's what I know so far. So I've gone from not caring about Nioh to Amazon Prime me that day one collector's edition. No. I have bought a couple of Dark Souls collector's editions though. But yeah, really interesting game so far. And playing Nioh has really got me thinking about some of the other games that have tried to take an influence from Dark Souls, some other Souls-like games. And the first one that comes to mind is Lords of the Fallen. I picked up this game a few years ago because I was kind of in the middle of two Souls releases, where you really want to play some Souls, but, there's no Souls around, you played all the other ones. So I was intrigued, but yeah, Lords of the Fallen, I mean, it aped all of the core systems of Dark Souls, including the stamina bar, exploration, bosses, checkpoints. It pretty much took all of the original ideas from Dark Souls, but then just completely fluffed the world building aspect and the story. the lore, the characters, any kind of atmosphere. It was just very generic and really underwhelming. And it just made me appreciate some of the Souls games even more because they bring together a lot of different things. They bring together the gameplay, which is in and of itself quite groundbreaking and quite interesting and fun. But they also have the really awesome world building too, and just the awesome atmosphere. So each game is a cohesive whole. And Souls-likes don't even have to actually be 3D. I mean, take Sultan's Sanctuary, for instance. It's an indie game available on the PS4 network, and I'm pretty sure it's on Steam as well. This game takes a lot of the core mechanics of Souls, like the stamina bar and kind of a bonfire checkpoint system, the death system, and it puts this into a 2D platformer kind of presentation. And it works better than you'd think. My problem with Sultan's Sanctuary, I'm just really not a fan of the art style. And that's a shame, because I think if it had something a bit more retro, a bit more pixel-based, I think that maybe I'd dig it a lot more. One of the games that Dark Souls, the original Dark Souls, which was the first one I played, I went back to Demon Souls, but one of the games Dark Souls reminds me of is the PS1 classic, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. And I'm not sure how many of you have played that, but oh my god, such a good game. It took that interconnected Metroid-style gameplay and combined it with that very weighty Castlevania-style platforming. And, the whole thing took place in this giant castle, full of secrets and hideous creatures and bosses and stuff. And it just had a really great atmosphere and absolutely gorgeous pixel art graphics. It's one of my favorite games of all time. And exploring the world of Dark Souls, Lordran, kind of reminded me of exploring that castle in Symphony of the Night. And maybe it's because of the verticality of the whole thing. I mean, the castle actually inverts on itself, and you have to play the whole thing upside down at one point. But Dark Souls has that really deep, tall game world as well. One of my dream games, my fantasy games that I would really love to see come to fruition someday is a Castlevania Souls-like. It can be 3D or 2D, From Software can make it, Konami can make it, anyone can make it. All you gotta do is just have some kind of stamina bar in there, and we're gold. And if it's 3D, slow down the combat, because the last few Castlevania games have been, for the most part, uninspired God of War ripoffs. So, I mean, they're very action-packed, and they're quite the spectacle, but they don't seem to have as much depth as games like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta have. Maybe it's just that Japanese take on 3D action that I prefer. But anyway, yeah, getting back to the Souls-like genre, it's still quite a young genre, There's only been a handful of Souls-likes, and a lot of them are indie games. But in terms of AAA games that ape the Souls series, that's one of the things about Nioh that's so exciting, because Lords of the Fallen was quite a hyped AAA release, and I think it disappointed a lot of people because it just didn't measure up to Dark Souls. Whereas Nioh, I mean, I've played like hours of this demo, and it's kept me coming back for more, to the point where I've actually completed it. So, I'm ready for the full game now, and I know I'm gonna like it. But yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to make this video in the first place. I just wanted to share my opinion as a longtime Souls fan. That yeah, this game gets my thumbs up so far, and I'm really surprised because I downloaded the beta just out of sheer boredom. Nioh could end up being a really decent AAA Souls-like, and I think that would be a great thing for fans of the Souls series and the new emergent genre of Souls-likes. And if Nioh sells well, I hope we get to see more games in this style, because even after completing every single Souls game, including Bloodborne and Demon Souls, I still feel like I have a fairly large appetite for that style of gameplay. And this is after going for the platinum medals and stuff, because, you've got to find a way to extend the game after you've beaten it 3 times, I mean, I even did the One Bro Challenge. I don't know if you know what the One Bro Challenge is, but for the original Dark Souls, basically, you had to start the game with a base level character, level 1 Pyromancer, and then you just never level up for the whole thing. And this ramps up the challenge to a extremely punishing degree. I mean, even regular enemies can one-shot you after a while, so boss fights become some of the most intense gaming experiences that you'll ever have. And it really cemented the original Dark Souls as one of my favorite games of all time, for sure. So yeah, if you're looking for a way to extend your enjoyment of that amazing game, please, I highly recommend you attempt the One Bro Challenge. And also make sure you do the DLC as well, because some of the DLC bosses at level 1 are insane. I mean, Calamite, Bringer of Calamity, the dragon, fighting him with like a shitty crossbow was an ordeal, to say the least. But I think I'll wrap it up here. Let me know what you think about Nioh and Souls-likes and stuff. And if anyone has a Souls-like that they want to recommend me, then that would be awesome, because I'm always looking for more of these games. You know, if there's anything that I've got my eye on these days, it's obtuse, difficult Japanese action RPGs that involve a stamina bar. Anyway, okay, thanks a lot for watching. This is Anvil Warface, and you've been listening to the AnvilCast. Catch you next time. Later.